This is the Coming Home Podcast with John Allen. Boom. And welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Coming Home Podcast with John Allen. I am your humble host, John Allen. If you're listening to me on a podcast platform, please look at the description of this episode, and that will tell you how to subscribe. That will tell you how you can support us if you would like to. Us. There is no us. It's me. I'm alone here. How you can support me if you like to. There's a couple of links you can click into where you will find information on how to donate and support. If you are watching me on YouTube, that's where I want you to be. Come to YouTube. That's where the magic is. You get to see this smiling face and the smiling faces of my fantastic guests that I have coming through. And in the description on the YouTube video, you will also see those same links that will guide you to platforms where you can support me with donations. Okay? Enough of that. Hello, Dr. Anthony. Hi.
Hello, John Allen. It's such a pleasure to meet you and to have a chance to talk.
You know, this is something I've been looking forward to. I came across the work that you do on YouTube, some videos that you've put out, and you have this fantastic focus on how do I explain it? When most people talk about integration, they're talking about, the standard integration into society, people learning the language, this, that, and the other. But you're talking about integrating people in the world of technology. You're talking about another type of focus on minority peoples. And it's Absolutely. Fantastic work.
It's a real pleasure of mine, and it's a privilege because it's not something that everyone is afforded, which is exactly what you were just saying there. And so for me to be able to use my power, to be able to use my influence, as a straight white guy in this industry, to give opportunities, to give decision-making authority, to give power to voices that may not may not be heard in those decision-making arenas. And I know that sounds really abstract, and I'm happy to nail down some concrete examples for you. But that's really my mantra. It's my life goal, is creating space, decentering myself so that others whose voices have been marginalized for most of recent history.
Well, let's nail it down. Let's get into some details about what you do. How did you get started in this kind of work? Was there something that happened in your life or something that you observed that guided you towards this type of work? And then tell us more precisely what that work is.
I think there's been an evolution since I was a child, but there's been a couple of key turning points. And so
where'd you grow up?
I grew up actually in Texas, in Fort Hood, Texas. Yeah. So the work that I'm doing now feels a little bit distant from that childhood experience. But I think that would be one of the earliest kind of encounters I've had with inequality, was coming up against a kind of a social value system that put people into different hierarchies of kind of abilities, needs, preferences, and things like that. Basically, what I'm talking about here is inequality. Yeah. And so as I grew up in Texas, and we ended up moving my family to outside of Washington, D.C., and I started college. I took a sociology class, I think in my first year, and it just blew my mind, because I'm, a young white guy in a rural area, kind of not really understanding the experience of people who are marginalized, disenfranchised, pushed aside, excluded, and sitting there thinking in the sociology class taught by a white, man professor, but sitting with people who, represented a much greater diversity, and looking next to me and thinking, this person didn't have the same opportunities that I had coming up, not because of much other than my parents, how, the world that they were born into, the income that they had, the education that they had, and not to mention the kind of intergenerational history that comes with that. Yes. And so that's one of my turning points. Another was kind of taking this opportunity to move to Norway and to start doing research on these issues around inequality and design. And so there was this longer term trajectory. Where I am now is certainly not where I started. And everybody sees these kind of figureheads and they think, oh, they must have always believed the things that they believe and always known the things that they, no, absolutely not. I mean, I grew up with the same prejudices and biases that everybody in my small town grew up with, right? It took me a lifetime to get to the point where I am now, where I recognize, understand issues around intersectionality, issues around discrimination, issues around public accommodations, things like that are complex and difficult to kind of absorb, but at the same time are fundamental to our ability to move forward as a society.
Talk a little bit about inequality when it comes to design. What is that? Because this is something I saw a couple of videos that you did on that. I believe it was the very first video I saw that you had done, and I'm like, inequality when it comes to design. I had never thought of that. Talk about that.
Design, I kind of have a very simple definition of design. Design is just decision making, right? It's just intentioned decision making. It's approaching the creation of something and being explicit about all the decisions we make that go into that. Right? So whether you're creating a new chair or whether you're creating a new piece of software or anything that you're creating, you're making a series of decisions. Design is about making those decisions conscious, being aware of the implications of those decisions, especially the implications on the people who you're expecting to adopt, use, or somehow kind of access your solutions, your creations. Yeah. And so in that process, we have to acknowledge that there's two kinds of ways of inequality sneaking in.
Yes.
One is based on our own bias. So the people who are actually creating those solutions are operating from their own headspaces, right? Which means that we have to pick apart, implicit bias and internalized all of the ogenies and isms that we possess. It's nothing that everyone kind of shares this in some degree or another. And so being explicitly aware of that is one thing. Being able to design in a way that can ensure that what you're doing isn't going to result in something that excludes or continues to marginalize people is the other thing. So you need two things here. You need an input and you need an output. You need diversity on the input side in order to ensure that the output side of things isn't reproducing inequality.
Now, some people would say that's an insurmountable obstacle. How can you design, for example, let's say someone comes with a new kind of, Apple gets some competition and a new kind of cell phone comes out. Mm-hmm. And some people would say, well, you can't make this work for everybody. Mm-hmm. You can't, there are people who are sight impaired or hearing impaired or maybe even have speech impediments. How can you take them into consideration when you're designing a new cell phone? What would you say to those people who kind of throw up their hand and say, hey, we do the best we can, and this is an issue that it's going to take too much time to resolve it so that it benefits everyone?
I would say you're right for the wrong reasons. You're right in saying that we will never get to the point where we're able to create something that is usable for everyone. Yeah. There will always be people that will be excluded, and it's just because we don't know enough. And so you're wrong for the reason that we know everything. We know how to make it work for everyone. And that's we can't do it because there's limitations. No, the limitations is one on our knowledge. Two is on our understanding of what human identity is. So I recently found, I think it was on TikTok or something, a really great video that talked about racism. And when people say, well, I'm not racist, the kind of response is, okay, you're not racist according to what century? Because not being racist in the 1800s meant a hell of a lot different of an idea than not being racist today.
I'm not racist, but I don't want my daughter to date a black guy or a Latin American. Yeah, but I'm not racist, so.
I mean, in the 17th to 18th century, I'm not racist meant, I don't believe that black people should be owned, right? That slavery should be a thing. Racist in the 1950s might have, or not being racist in the 1950s might have been like, I believe in integration in schools. Yeah. 1960s, 1970s might be, okay, I believe in interracial marriage. So like that concept evolves. Our understanding of what it is to be human evolves. So like things like the autism spectrum. Yes. That was not a thing, 20 or 30 years ago, or is just emerging as a thing. Issues around trans rights and transgender, our understanding of what we can do today to empower these groups is not the same way it was in history. No. And that is not because those groups didn't exist. They existed. They were oppressed, marginalized, and ignored, intentionally. And so I think that what we can do in order to maximize the potential of our design decisions is to first of all recognize the diversity of what it is to be human, and seek to bring in those perspectives and those insights as much as possible, as early as possible in the design process. And you will realize the outputs through that.
Yes, good point. What do you think when it comes to the corporate world or the world of design? How serious are they considering? How serious are their efforts to make things accessible to those who are traditionally marginalized? I mean, we see very often, go back to last summer, the murder of George Floyd. So many in the corporate world said, oh, we're going to do this, that, and the other to diversify and racial awareness and different workshops and donations. Well, a report came out about a week ago that showed that only a fraction of those companies have committed a fraction of the money that they had promised. So I'm wondering, is that the same thing that we see when it comes to the design world or the tech world? They might speak a good case for the promotion of these ideas to be as inclusive as possible, but do they really do it?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of examples we can point to of purple washing and pink washing and every other kind of washing of a company's image to make them look more inclusive. And I work with a lot of these companies, so I see them doing it firsthand.
Yes.
The reality is here that there are usually in the largest companies a small group of people who truly care about the issue of inclusion and design and diversity and everything, who are fighting every day to try to make change from the inside out. The tragedy here is that many times I see these people getting completely burnt out and losing their hope because the machine is just not engineered to produce diversity and inclusion, to take advantage of, to use diversity and inclusion as an opportunity. Now, I do see hope. There are places where I see great hope. A lot of what we are lucky enough to have today in terms of attention and awareness and diversity and inclusion is because of the millennial generation. And I come from the previous generation, Generation X. But what I've seen the millennial generation be able to achieve in terms of awareness and actually drawing in more inclusive voices has been phenomenal.
I have to say, I agree with you about the millennials take a lot of heat. Oh, yeah. I'm also a stand-up comic, and I really rag on the millennials in my routine. But when it's said and done, it is the millennials who seem to be driving this demand for change, this demand for inclusiveness. So hats off to the millennials.
Yeah, it wasn't my generation. I mean, we spent most of the time just resenting the world and then hating everybody. And then, we grew up and got jobs. I
saw the movie Breakfast Club. It was on TV here in Norway a few weeks ago. And I'm like, you just end up hating everybody who's in charge, everybody who's older than you. Yeah. That's us. That's Generation X.
Yeah, for real. So that's one point of hope. Yes. The other point of hope I've seen really, and I think these two are a little bit tethered together here, is young people who are willing to go down the road of entrepreneurship, able to embed inclusion at the earliest stages of their business design. So this is not even talking about product design here, but the design of their business models. Yeah. And I believe that will create another tipping point in the future where more and more emphasis, understanding, knowledge, and empowerment can occur in the area of inclusion. And there's a third point of hope here I want to bring in, and that is the work that's being done in a lot of countries in the global South is phenomenal. Okay. They are going to, the countries that I work in, Mozambique, Uganda, Somalia, Ethiopia, they are leapfrogging a lot of the countries in Europe. They are in the process of leapfrogging right now when it comes to these issues of diversity, inclusion, and sustainability, because all of these ethical aspects of how we run businesses, how we design products and services that's the starting point for them.
Yes.
They're not retrofitting anything. It's
and that kind of
day one.
And that kind of speaks to my observation that very often the larger companies, I could say the largest companies in the Western world kind of give just lip service to the concept of inclusion. Yeah. Whereas, these so-called third world nations are actually doing it from the start.
Yeah.
They're not talking about it. They're doing it. They're making it happen. That's going to be their strength as the years come on,
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the first kind of brushes I had with the level of thinking was actually in Mozambique, and I was working with a group of that was focused on the rights of women with disabilities. And here I am thinking about women with disabilities and the intersectionality of what that means as in terms of their gender and their disability. Of course, being in Mozambique, also being marginalized in terms of, being Black and coming from a low-income country, thinking about the power that movement can have there versus a lot of the advocacy organizations that I've worked with in the various countries in the global north, where it seems like the emphasis is more put on dividing up an empire than it is on recognizing the complexity of what it is to be human and actually pushing forward an agenda that meets everyone's needs in a realistic way. I been very encouraged to see the level of advocacy and the approach that they've taken to advocacy in a lot of the countries I've worked with in Africa and even in China.
Now, working with these different companies in these different countries, give us a more clear picture of exactly what it is that you do. How do you come in contact with these companies, and what is the plan? You knock on their door and you present yourself, and then what happens? What do you do?
Well, it's not quite as cut and dry as that is. All of this is built out of relationships. None of what I do is connected to institutions by name. Okay. I could care less if you're the highest level authority at the EU or UN, or if you're some hotshot professor from Harvard or MIT. That's not what matters to me. No. It's the human being behind it that matters. And so all of the work that I do begins with a human relationship. It begins with someone that I connect with, who I learn from, and who can hopefully learn a little bit from me.
Well, there's the power of networking.
Exactly. It is very much the power of networking and building those relationships over time, because a lot of this, actually not a lot of it, all of it is trust-based, right? All the work we do, they trust me that I know what I'm doing and that I'm able to help them in a way that makes meaningful sense for them in their local context. I trust them that I'm not going to, they're not, they're helping me and calling me out on my biases and my prejudices that I have internalized. Because that is probably the most important as a white guy coming into a country like Mozambique. I don't come in with an agenda. I come in with help me understand where you're at, and we can move forward together. That's so when they tell you, I'm kind of an empty vessel.
So when they tell you what their business is all about and what they're trying to do, how do you assist them? Where does your role come in?
It's really responsive. So I'm a proponent of the agile methodology, which is kind of project management that just says we should be responsive to changing conditions. So a lot depends on the needs in particular. So, for example, one of the businesses that I run is called Mufano. It's a design lab in Uganda, based in Kampala. Amazing work. You guys can Google Mufano, Uganda, and find out all about their
How do you spell that?
Initiatives. MFANO. It's MFANO.
Got it.
So they're doing some really amazing work down there with business design, inclusive design, sustainable design. And when I first connected with them, it was through a colleague here in Norway who was originally from one of the neighboring countries, Burundi. And he just said, hey, there's this really cool initiative going on in Uganda. You should hear about it. Let's, talk, see if there's a way to get you involved. I said, sure, why not? Again, it's all personality based. It's all connections and network and being human,
Sure.
It's just that the humanity of it. And so I said, yeah, let's check it out what they're doing. He told me more about them. I think we went down, late a couple of years ago, later in the year. I spent a week there with the founders. We got to know one another. We decided, we're going to collaborate on this business. And then it was just a matter of what are the immediate needs? Because then, of course, COVID started. So we had to do some emergency management with that because every business had to pivot. But just understanding what are the needs, and then what resources do we have available to us? What resources can we marshal? And how can we use those resources to solve the problems that the business is facing? Once it's kind of triage, right? It's kind of somebody comes into the emergency room, you just kind of get them to stop dying.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you're at a place where they can kind of continue on. And that's when I take my hands off of the wheel, because I don't know what the hell anybody's experience is living in Kampala. I don't know what the market situation is in Kampala. I only know my background, what I've experienced. And if that can create value for them, then great. And there has been opportunities to create value there. But beyond that, it would be unethical for me to stay, to take a large controlling role in that business.
Now,
just as an example.
You seem to be very aware of the fact that you are an outsider coming in. You carry a certain amount of humbleness or humility with you. Do you ever consider that maybe if you were more... Now, how do I ask this question? Do you ever do you ever consider taking your talents that you have, that you use to help others, and internalize that and just build your own design business or start your own company that has a different direction than what you're doing now? Because it takes a lot of talent to do what you do. It takes a lot of people understanding to do what you do. And that is the foundation for creating some of these businesses that you're working with. You could create your own. Do you ever think about taking a new direction with your talents, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So I started my first business when I was a teenager, and it failed miserably. So
what was it?
I'm a long-time entrepreneur with a lot of failures under my belt.
What was that first business?
This is so embarrassing. Oh my God.
Oh, here we go.
It was a nightclub for people under 21, because there was nowhere in my hometown that people under 21 could go to just hang out. You ended up being on the streets, just hanging out in parking lots. Or if you were 21, you could go to a bar, but there was no other real entertainment options. And so I figured, all right, you know what? I'm going to open an under 21 club in my town, found a building, put a deposit down on the lease. I got a loan from my parents because, of course, I'm lucky enough to have that as a support. And within, I think, a week of putting the down payment on the location, the city passed an ordinance that said there were no under 21 clubs allowed in the city. Yeah. So it was my first brush with regulation as well. Yes. So it was really a huge learning opportunity. It took me 15 years to pay back that loan to my parents.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So,
good on your parents. Good on your parents for demanding that you pay that back. Because a lot of parents would just be like, oh, sweetheart. Okay. Just, forget about that.
I always taught very good lessons when it comes to finance.
I like it.
So that was a really important learning opportunity for me. And I mean, in the meantime, there were all kinds of little tiny initiatives that I tried to get started, and that, putting small teams together, trying to see what are the competencies you need for this or that. And I think there was one initiative was around study abroad for high schoolers in my area. So we wanted to take them through different locations in Europe, and that went up, up in smoke after a few months. And one of them was before iPads came out, I had this idea for my uncle, and I actually had this idea for a digital sheet music. So instead of the traditional paper, you just put a kind of a tablet. This was early days of tablets. So again, before iPad, where you could just go poof, 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 and you have all of your sheet music right there. Of course, a couple of years later, the iPad came out, and that aspiration went up in smoke as well.
Yeah.
But recently, in the last couple of years, I've opened a few businesses and co-founded a few businesses here in Norway. And I co-run a business in Ukraine and one in the US. So here in Norway, 2 years ago. What's that?
In the Ukraine, isn't that a little scary, seeing as it's quite unstable there, seeing as, Russia has their shenanigans going on? Yeah. Isn't that a little, I don't know, how do you feel about all that? How has that affected you?
I mean, the country is really diverse, so it's a huge country, right? And the things that are going on in certain parts of the country aren't necessarily always reflected in all other areas of the country. So we're operating out of Lviv, Ukraine, which is clear on the western.
Okay, yeah. Kind of away from where all of the excitement is happening. Yeah.
And I mean, I do work a little bit in Kiev, and I currently have a project with a partner in Kharkiv, which is all the way out in the eastern side. Yeah. So, you got to be sensitive to these issues. You got to be aware of them. And especially when it comes to human rights issues, we really have to step lightly. Yeah. And I work in China too, where, there are serious human rights issues, concerns. And so the work in Ukraine, it's built on trust. I trust the partners that I have there.
Okay.
They're working with UNDP. They're working with city governments. So they are well connected in the kind of machinery.
UNDP, what is that?
The UN Development Program.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, this is the branch of the UN that's really in charge of international development on a large scale.
Okay.
And so, it's something you have to constantly be aware of because you don't want to put yourself or your colleagues in harm's way. And at the same time, it's not something you could ignore either. And so one of the things we're advocating for there and are rolling out product lines is focused on disability rights and access to technology.
Yeah. Okay.
So the group that I'm working with is called Inclusive IT, Inclusive-IT. And we've hit a lot of success in attracting attention, projects, and we're slowly starting to roll out a product that focuses on creating a sort of marketplace for businesses that want to create accessible technology with persons with disabilities who are expert testers of technology, so that the marriage here can provide really actionable feedback and guidance for those companies to create more accessible technologies for people with disabilities.
Now, here's something that sounds interesting to me. You mentioned that you do work in China as well. Now, how do you experience that when it comes to, design, fairness in design and access, making design accessible to those who are disadvantaged? Because China is notorious for not having a good track record when it comes to human rights and equality. What have you experienced there?
The crazy thing about my work in China has been that it's not that much different than a lot of other countries. Maybe in human rights terms, we can say yes, that China is in a different space. But in design terms, they're not far off from a lot of other countries in the world. And what we found was if you approach designers in China from the perspective of usability, that this isn't necessarily about marginalized groups. This is just about making your products and services more usable for everybody.
I understand. Yeah. Well, maybe that's because they're focused on the profit. They're not really. Yeah, and because of that, it indirectly is a benefit when it comes to design equality, because they're thinking about profit.
It's the entry point.
Exactly.
So it's a starting point of creating a conversation around marginalization then. Because you say first, you already believe in making your products usable for as many people as possible. You know the importance of this, user testing and user-centered design. So now we have to rethink who you're putting at the center of that design.
Exactly.
Right.
And then it's it's a good way to kind of slowly make them more aware, more conscious of everything that has to do with equality.
And honestly, it's the same argument I make for almost any firm I know. Yes. And so I don't think we're so far ahead of countries like China in those terms. We're basically all struggling with the same fundamental issue.
Yeah.
The people who are designing our products and services are making decisions that puts them into a position of power. People who don't have power don't have access to those decisions.
What's your best success story in the work that you do? Everybody has that one case or that one episode in their life and in their work that they say, yes, this makes me want to do what I do.
Yeah, I think one of them was when I've been working in Mozambique for 6 years now. And when I first went there, I was there with a colleague of mine who, he's Mozambican. He's an amazing human being. He needs to be sainted. He is such, in terms of my superheroes and people who I role model, he's top the guy, bar none. Yeah. He's got it going on. I'll give you more info about him because he's just somebody I adore and admire. But anyway, so he and I went there and we collected the first data set around understanding and awareness of accessibility and universal design in Mozambique. So it gave us a chance to kind of establish a baseline. Where are we at in this country with this issue? And we published a couple of articles about it so that, we got that out in terms of the scientific community. And from there, we really started advocating for a change in the law. Now, there had been some talk about producing disability rights legislation there, a law for disability rights, for a little bit of time. But it was shortly after we collected that initial data set that they really started putting it on the legislative agenda. And they were in the process of passing the law, and the disability rights groups based there in Uganda, with some support and guidance from myself and George. George is my colleague down in Mozambique. Put a halt to it because the legislation was being passed without consulting the disability rights groups there. And so we said, nope, we're not going to have any of this. And we put a halt to the legislation. Now, I haven't been able to follow up since then, so I don't know what the status is of that. But in this process, we were working with one of the local universities, the largest university there in Mozambique, the University of Eduardo Mondlane, working in their computer science department to create a course on universal design for their master's degree students. And so getting to go there a few years ago and teach universal design to 17, it was the first class with 17 people, Mozambican computer scientists that were going to go out and lead the industry there in Mozambique, was life-changing. Yes. I remember coming back on the plane, and I had a photo shoot right after I touched down, and I touched down and went straight to the photo shoot, and was just sitting there trying to process what had happened in the few weeks prior, and realizing that this is something that I need to find ways of continuing that. Yes. Now, precursor to that story was I had just gotten surgery on my ankle a month prior. So I was 1 month post-op of surgery on crutches, traveling from Norway in a wheelchair, using a wheelchair from Norway to Turkey. I had a connection to South Africa to Mozambique. So I'm sitting there teaching these 17 students on crutches. I brought one of my colleagues who's originally from India and who is completely blind. So he was there. And I had one of my research assistants who was also one of my former students. She was there. And so we all got this like firsthand look at the way design affects a spectrum of people, because here I am temporarily disabled because of my surgery. You
got a little taste of their condition, their marginalized condition,
yeah. But you know what? I'll be honest with you. The airport experience, the easiest, most accessible was Mozambique.
Really?
From the time I stepped off that plane, I had somebody accompanying me, taking me to exactly where I go, telling me, what else do you need? Is there anything else I can help you with? All these things. When I was in Turkey, they got me off the plane, didn't speak a word to me, put me into it wasn't a holding cell, but it was like a place that they were like isolated from everyone else. So if I needed to go to the bathroom or if I needed to buy something, I had to ask permission to leave. right?
Wow.
And in Norway, it's kind of the opposite. It was completely hands off. They're like, oh, if you need a wheelchair, they're over there.
Well, some countries just have a certain level of awareness, and some countries have no awareness of those issues.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the surprising thing here was that it was Mozambique that
Mozambique that had
the greatest level of accommodation.
Yeah. And a lot of people would assume, and this has to do with the different bias that is ingrained in us. A lot of people would assume that you would have the worst experience with that in Mozambique. Hello, people, wake up.
Yeah, and this is something that I have an argument with people about all the time. And they say, oh, trying to create something that's universal design is going to cost so much money. And I'm like, look at that as an example. You have one of the wealthiest countries in the world, Norway. And this is not to throw shade at Norway. Norway does great in a lot of accessibility issues. But are they the best? Absolutely not. Should they be? Are they the best compared to how much money they have on hand? Absolutely not.
Exactly.
So I'm not going to excuse them for that. No. And then here you have Mozambique, one of the poorest countries on earth, and they've still provided an accessibility service in a real way. They've still delivered. So yeah, anyways, getting to teach those students was amazing. The year after I taught that class, I had 50 students in the same class.
Yes.
Yeah, so it grew, it almost tripled in size.
Yes. Wow, that's impressive. So you're doing things that are creating real change on the ground, and positivity is contagious. When that environment, when that circle of people in Mozambique or wherever begin to, if I can use the term, preach their success to others, it's going to grow.
Yeah.
Other people are going to get infected with that positivity. Have you seen? Just talk about some of the changes that you've seen. You mentioned Mozambique, but what kind of changes have you seen in larger, more established countries and companies?
It's a really good question.
Because again, I worry about these established companies, and I worry about these larger nations paying lip service to the whole concept of inclusion and change, and it'll last for a while, and then it just fades back to normal.
Yeah. The work that I've done in a lot of the global north and with established countries has been on a lot higher level. So, and I think that's kind of a fundamental problem that we run into in working in the global south. It's a lot easier to get at the grassroots.
Sure.
Yeah,
easy
the grassroots
access,
is just right there. It's tangible. It's right in your face. You can just access it immediately.
Yeah.
And it's the grassroots that has the greatest need. So there's automatically an opportunity there.
They're open for those ideas. They want change. They want new ideas. Yeah.
But if you go into an established company, getting access to a line level employee is nearly impossible.
Yeah. Not
because there's any kind of protectionism, but just because there's not a lot of empowerment on the lowest level. And so it's even if the lowest level can make the critical decisions that could change things, it's really hard to gain access to that group.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the work that I've done in established companies and in I've done policy work at the UN and with national governments, including the Norwegian government. And I won't say it's purely lip service, but the challenges are complex because the institutions are complex.
Okay.
There's
bureaucracy.
There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of top-down thinking, not a lot of bottom-up, not enough bottom-up. And that's where real change happens anyways. I don't believe in top-down change. The top-down change is good for setting a direction, for maybe creating a framework of action, but that's it.
Sure.
Once you have that framework of action, you really have to activate people's hearts and minds at the grassroots.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, the shift that I've seen happen in the areas where there has been change it's the simplest thing. It's changing your mind, changing your attitude.
Yeah.
Right. There's not a complicated formula here. It's not a matter of we need billions and billions of dollars to buy all this new tech, and that if we had all of these new spaces and we had all these new things, you don't need that much money. You just need a change of attitude.
Thinking of a change of attitude, I think about, I'm sorry to interrupt here. I'm thinking about those mid-level leaders. In the business culture, it seems that those mid-level leaders have a tendency to only look upward, because they want that personal advancement. They want to go from being a mid-level leader to being a top dog. They want to impress those people who are at the top. And they're spending so much time looking upward. If they would look laterally or down, look at the people who are running the mailroom. What can you do to involve them more in the workings of this business? What can you do to make them more comfortable and more put them in a situation where they feel that they're contributing more? Because if they feel that they are contributing more, then they will contribute more. So there needs to be some sort of a culture change with that, starting with that mid-level management person.
Yeah,
those are the people to talk to, probably.
Maybe. I think they would be an important actor in this whole thing. Yeah. But getting back into changing the way people think, it's also changing internally how we think about the organization. The people who have the most power in any company are the maintenance staff of the buildings that we work at. Like, they can change everything about the way we work in a heartbeat.
How so?
Just adjusting temperatures. They control the environments we work in. So if anybody should be revered in a company, it should be the people who are cleaning the toilets, the people who are
so you went even deeper.
Painting the walls. They're the ones who are shaping our everyday experience.
So you went even deeper. I was thinking of that mid-level manager, but you're talking about those people. Yeah, maintenance level. Okay.
Absolutely. And I think we undervalue the people who are performing these essential tasks in our work so much. CEO can make a decision that never affects anybody on the lowest line, but somebody who doesn't clean a toilet one day, you're going to see it. You're going to know that hasn't been cleaned. Yes. All right. So I think we so undervalue the people who matter the most in our organizations.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was looking at it from a kind of different angle, that if we could get the mid-level management aware of that fact, then that would actually bring about significant change, because they are closer to those people.
Maybe.
That's why I mentioned mid-level management.
Maybe. I'm not sure. I don't hold a lot of faith for that, to be honest with you. And it's only because I think the where they're being held, juxtaposed between the people that they should be serving, their employees, and the top level management whom they are reporting to.
Yes.
I don't see a lot of opportunity for action there.
Okay.
They're being pulled both directions, and either choice, no matter what their decision that they make, is always going to be a lose-lose scenario. But it's very difficult in middle management to create win-win scenarios.
But because it is so difficult, isn't that an area that we should have more focus on, to where we could possibly change that? Again, that's why I mentioned those mid-level management people, because it's, I think they have more influence on the way things work internally than people realize.
Maybe you're probably right. I honestly don't know, John Allen.
Let's say I'm right.
Let's say I'm right. The limits of my knowledge now. I will say this though. I don't honestly. In all the companies that I own, we have a growth strategy that caps at 7 full-time employees. There is I have no interest at all in creating institutions that are, that growth goes beyond our capacity to perform responsively and agilely, and to even close up shop when it's necessary. The worst thing you can have is a company that's so big and everybody relies on so much that you can't afford to close it.
Yeah.
Right. That's, society. We cannot build a well-functioning society with only a few players who are controlling a lot of what we do.
Right.
We need huge diversity in the market.
Yes.
We need a lot of little players doing really, really good work to make a substantial change.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's my philosophy on that. That's why middle management thing, I just don't buy into it, because I don't feel like the companies who are operating that need mid-level management are already failing.
So how does it work? Is it that companies approach you or you approach them? I mean, I know a lot of this has to do with networking and people whom you meet. I guess I'm interested in knowing, how much resistance do you meet? How much, how often do you not get the cooperation you're looking for? Because you're asking some companies to change, and change is often resisted.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I'm fortunate enough that I'm in a position where I can choose who I work with. And so I don't work with people who are not interested in change. They're going to die one way or the other. John Allen. That's the brutal truth of it. Either, market or, just human physiology. Eventually people die and, the world moves on. So, when you take a long-term look at things, there's been so many industries that are just completely irrelevant now. The industries that are really, really, really relevant right now are eventually going to be irrelevant. And so I don't, this saying, don't suffer fools wisely, or don't something along those lines. I'm a huge proponent of that. And I translate that to, you don't want to throw yourself up against the same brick wall over and over again.
I would think there's so much good work for you to do out there that, to spend time trying to convince someone, there's no sense in that. There's more than enough good work to be done out there.
Yeah, I learned this early in my career as well when I was working in industry, when I first finished university, that, you're not going to, I never felt that my, what I can do is going to be helpful trying to do change from the inside out. If you put me in the belly of the beast and try to make me change that beast in some significant way, I'm just going to become frustrated, resentful, and eventually just give up. So I exited the beast as soon as I could. I entered a new industry, academia, as early in my career as I could. And, no regrets there. Not that academia is necessarily this kind of pristine, kind of completely problematic-free environment, but
there's some issues there.
Yeah, what's that?
I say there's some issues there in the world.
Oh, there's huge issues there. But the culture is generally good, and it gave me the opportunity to accelerate my career in the way I have, which is I'm really, really grateful for.
You don't feel that you would have more success or an easier path if you were doing this work from the United States?
Yeah, that's a good question. For the work that I'm doing, Europe and the EU, especially in Norway, have been huge supporters, and not just in lip service, but and financially supporting the kind of work that I'm doing.
Good funding opportunities.
Yeah, massive funding opportunities. I think the EU gives millions and millions of euro every year to try to find new ways of creating the world around us, that to be more inclusive and more equal. And Norway puts up a lot of that money too. So I don't think that the channel that my career took would not have been available to me in the U.S. It would have had to take a very different approach.
What do you think you'd be doing if you were still back in the States then? How different would your life be?
Well, when I left, I was working in health research. I imagine a lot of the work that I would have done would continue down that road. So I was working with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I was working with a local Fox Chase Cancer Center, a local cancer research institute in Philadelphia. I was working with my university and with Penn State University. So there would have been a fair likelihood I would have continued down that road in some way, shape, or form. The move to Norway and the work that I did on Universal Design was a huge left turn in my career. And I owe my partner such a debt of gratitude for having the foresight and enough of an objective view of who I was to be able to say, Anthony, this career would be perfect for you. I didn't see it. And I've said this many times on my podcast and in other presentations that I was not interested in universal design. I was like, when I first found that it's this topic, I was like, what the hell is this? This is just like disability and technology. I said, okay, it's important, it's disability, but like, is it that important? And then I was like, okay, well, it's just a Norwegian thing. Like, universal design is just about Norway. And then I dismissed it because I was like, oh, it's just a global north problem. It's just, it's like a high income country problem. Yeah. Come to realize I was wrong about every one of those things.
It's good to be wrong sometimes.
It is very good, especially for academics. And we don't admit how wrong we are sometimes.
So tell me about your transition from the United States to Norway. How did that happen?
So I've been looking for about a year for jobs internationally. As I said, I was working in kind of the health research for quite a while. And I had job opportunities coming up in the U.S., but I turned them down because I was really looking for work to expand my horizons, basically.
Yeah. You wanted a new challenge.
What's that?
You wanted a new challenge.
I wanted a new challenge. I wanted a new environment. I wanted a new social, cultural environment. I knew that was important to me. Mm-hmm. And my partner is originally from Vienna, Austria. So it was also something that she wanted. She wasn't looking to move to the US. It was something that we kind of chose, that we wanted to move somewhere international.
How'd you meet her? So, that's a long. That's a long walk from the States to Vienna, Austria.
She was living and studying in the U.S. And outside of Washington, D.C. And we met at a folk dance outside of Washington, D.C. In Glen Echo, Maryland.
Hey, everybody, Dr. Anthony dances as well.
And there is videos on YouTube of me dancing as well. So
you should not have told me that, because now guess what I'm going to link to in the description of this episode.
Oh my gosh. So we met at a folk dance, and we both wanted to move internationally. Okay. And we weren't sure where. She was studying economics at the time in Vienna. And I had just finished my master's degree. And so I was looking for research assistants, research fellows, PhD positions, Canada, Europe, Australia. We were just looking all over. And I had an interview in Australia, in Canberra. I had an interview in Vancouver and an interview in Florence.
You actually traveled to these interviews, or did you do it by video?
No, by video? All over the phone, actually. This was even pre, we had things like Skype, but, it wasn't as popular as it is now. That's it was just phone interviews. Yeah. And I had an offer out of Australia that came right around the same time as the offer in Norway. The one here, there was kind of a couple of things that influenced my decision. One was the fact that in public health, which is what I studied in my master's, the Scandinavian countries are put on a huge pedestal because it's kind of like this is how you run an effective healthcare system. So I already had a really good impression of Norway. I also had on PBS in the US, there was a TV show called Scandinavian Cooking or something like that. With this guy Andreas Viestad, he's just a cooking personality, a chef personality, and I loved his personality. I loved his approach to food, even though you realize the reality of Scandinavian cooking when you move here, which is a different story. But he had
that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, whole nother podcast. He presented Norway really well, though. Yeah. It was a 3-year position, so that was really attractive to be able to stay somewhere for 3 years. It came with a lot of perks. There was like an allowance to return home. There was an allowance for training and for research. So it was EU funded.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, it was a great deal. It was EU funded. There was 13 other researchers in 7 different institutes in Europe. So it was a chance to really build that network, to create a network. And that's exactly what we did. The project ran really, really successfully. And I got to meet people who literally wrote human rights laws, like for the UN. Like these are the people who wrote those words that we hold as our human rights. Yes. And it's so bizarre to meet these people because you're kind of like, you're just a human. You look at the UN institution and human rights and you think, okay, this is like, it's laid down by some god, and then it's just another person, and you're like, okay, that's I get it now.
No, it's that some people almost are afraid to meet celebrities or figures that they look up to, and I can imagine that feeling of awe. Yeah. To talk to someone who has actually been so involved in such important work as human rights, things that are laid down and written in black and white in the UN.
Yeah, it's humbling, but it's also it's hilarious because you get to know them on a personal level, and they'll tell you these stories that you're just kind of sitting there going, what the hell kind of world do we live in that's even a thing? Like one of the guys that I met, he was at UN headquarters. He was actually led the drafting of the UN's Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And he works at a very premier institution. And when he would travel to New York to help write this document, he had to sleep on his friend's couch Like, he didn't have the money to put himself up in the hotel, and his host institution wasn't paying it, and the UN wasn't paying it. So you got to, like, that sort of story just blows your mind, because you're sitting here again, you're thinking about these hallowed institutions of, like, great, power and wealth, and then you're kind of sitting there going, but here's a person who's literally writing a human rights law, and you're like, he's got to sleep on his friend's couch.
Well, that's one thing that I learned doing this podcast. This episode with you will be episode 131. 130. Yeah, thank you. 131 episodes over 14 months, roughly.
Wow.
And that's a lot of episodes with a lot of different people. And one thing that I have realized is that feeling of awe when you meet an important person, it's justified. But as you say, there's also that when you come back down to earth and you see that they're just another good person. I really experienced that when I had a little bit of anxiety before I was going to speak with Dr. Howell Wexler. He was a one-time head of the Department for Child Health and Education at the CDC.
Wow.
And I had a little bit of anxiety. I kept thinking that I should, maybe I need to study. I need to study up on the, he's going to be talking over my head. Yeah. And it wasn't like that at all. He was the friendliest guy with the greatest sense of humor, speaking in he didn't speak down to me. And it's you learn something when you speak to so many important people. Another example was when I spoke to Ralph Molina, the drummer for Neil Young's band Crazy Horse. Dude, I'm thinking this guy's got, he's been doing it for 50 years. He's going to have an attitude. He's going to be arrogant. No, he was the sweetest guy. I almost wanted to call him Uncle Ralph. I mean, he was just the nicest guy. Yeah,
That's so adorable.
No, he was the sweetest guy, friendly and great sense of humor. And it just, after a while, you start learning that people are people. We're all on the same level. We all want the same things. We have our varying accomplishments, which may be greater or smaller, but we're still just people.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, the level of accomplishment of people, I think, can sometimes be overemphasized. I rely on the person. I found that
out as well.
Yeah. It's just like I said about the maintenance staff. Like, I rely on the person at the grocery store who checks my groceries out as much as I rely on the prime minister to, keep peace in the country. Like, we are all reliant on each other.
People have a tendency to have this arrogance where you think that your position is so much greater than that position over there. And I think we're seeing that in the States now with the discussion around the minimum wage.
Yes.
Look how important people are in the service industry, because now they don't want to work for that minimum wage anymore.
Good.
They're staying home and they're collecting, $600 a week roughly for unemployment insurance. And they would rather do that than go and work for much less than that at these service jobs. So all of these years, these people who curse out the waiter or waitress or the bag person at the grocery store, see how important their job is now?
Yeah.
See how important it is? They're not taking that job, and look how you suffer. You can't go out and eat at your favorite restaurant because it's not open, because they don't have anybody to work there.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Empower to them.
It's an eye-opener for a lot of people.
It is. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at the breakdown of demographics in the service industry, a lot of these positions, especially positions at the minimum wage level, are occupied by marginalized groups of people. And so you add that whole, the systems of oppression that exist in our society that are completely unrecognized.
It's built in. It has been there for so long that we don't even acknowledge it. We don't even recognize it. Nobody sees that this unfairly low minimum wage is a form of discrimination. People don't see that. And I'm hoping that the longer we're in this situation where people are choosing to stay home rather than go and work for that minimum wage, I hope that the longer that goes on, the more people come to realize that minimum wage is unfair, but also that we need to lose this arrogance that we have, where we have for decades looked down on those people as being less than in the job environment.
And the stupid thing about it is, in a lot of different contexts, if it's not a big chain restaurant, or if it's not a big box store or anything like that, if it's just a mom and pop shop, you're less likely to have that sort of arrogance, right? If it's just the people who own the shop next door to you, you're not going to cuss them out, because you got to see them tomorrow when you're going to school. You got to see them tomorrow when you're, walking down the street. So I find this issue that we have with the depersonalization of human interactions, because of the way we've constructed our companies, the businesses that we rely on, that's what is creating a fundamental issue here. We have these big monopolistic enterprises that are coming into towns and creating, these
Walmart.
Of the world, and they employ people at the lowest possible wages, and the patrons of those stores then treat the people as commodities, which is because that's what the institution's treating them as, is commodities. They're not treating them as employees who they care about, and they're literally thinking about their long-term growth or their, anything like that. They're just thinking, how much labor can we extract from them at the lowest possible price? And then people treat them in the same way. And of course, we're all surprised and shocked that this would happen. But like I said, I would be surprised if the same issue held up when it comes to a mom and pop shop that, again, is part of the community. And that, more importantly, a mom and pop shop, when they're employing people, they're not thinking about how they can extract the most labor out of them necessarily. They're creating relationships that, we can also look at on a longer term basis.
Yes. If you pay people right, if you pay them correctly, you're going to get better work out of them. And I don't understand the resistance to something, for example, like raising the minimum wage. Everybody should get behind that, because that's going to benefit you. It could possibly benefit you directly if you lose your job and you've got to go out and start all over again. Don't you want to get paid as much as possible? And that higher wage is going to motivate people to do more work, to give them they're going to be more productive. There's been studies that show that that's the case.
And I mean, this gets into so many complicated issues, because then we have to talk about the C-suite salaries, the CEO and executive level salaries, and what's the difference between them and the line level workers. We get into issue around taxation, and we get into issues around the price of goods and services.
But it is a complex thing, isn't it? All those things do tie together. It's super complex.
Yeah? I, for one, though, have no problem. I mean, we live in Norway, so we know what it's like to go to the grocery store and see that shopping bill at the end of the day and think, I would have paid maybe a third of the price in the US, or, I would have gotten a lot cheaper, at another place. I'm okay with paying that.
So am I. I used to react to the higher prices, for example, buying groceries, but now, it's the price that it is. Yeah. And I don't even think about it. I really don't.
If I can look in the eye for the person ringing up my food and know that they're making a living wage, that they have a comfortable living, that they're happy and the quality of life that they have, I'm cool. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If I know that they're going to get a month off in the summer to be able to go on vacation, and they're going to be able to afford to go on vacation, I'm good. I'll pay that surcharge, because I know that the society that I'm living in is benefiting from that.
And again, there's this selfishness or this arrogance back home in the States. I see people when I engage with them in conversation, and they'll say things like, well, I had to go out and get this degree, and I had to work hard to get my position. That person can go ahead and make $7.50 an hour until they do what I did to make it. So there's that selfishness. There's that thing to where you don't wish your fellow American well. Whereas here in Norway, they wish their fellow Norwegians well. They want them to make that living wage, even though they are, and I put this in air quotes, even though they're only working at a cash register somewhere. There's not that stigmatizing of those type of jobs here in Norway. That is a legitimate job where you can make a living, support yourself and your family. And that's awesome. Accepted. Yeah, it's great. And it's great, because don't we want the least of us to have it as good as possible? And I'm not saying cashiers in Norway are the least of us in Norway, but I'm saying, don't we want the least of us to have it as good as possible? If you look at it on a household level, don't you want your youngest child to be as strong and healthy and as educated as possible? Because all that does is lift up the entire household. So then if you expand that to the neighborhood, don't you want the worst off family in the neighborhood to have it as good as possible? And then you expand that to the state level. Then you expand that to the national level. Don't you want the most marginalized, the weakest of us, if you will, to be as strong as possible? Because that will only benefit the nation.
Yeah. It's a rising tide lifts all boats. It's that.
Well, there you go. I said it with a million words. You said it with one sentence.
Okay. And I said it because somebody else said it.
That's why I'm a podcaster. I like to talk too much.
No worries. The other way I've heard this put is that after the monarchies fell, that in Europe, as the democracies emerged, everyone was treated like nobility, and in the U.S., everyone was treated like a peasant.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the kind of way, and this, I don't know where I've heard that, but it's not my saying. It's I'm borrowing it or paraphrasing it. But I think the analogy kind of holds up in a lot of ways. In the States, there was always this feeling of you don't deserve what you've gotten.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that issue of deservedness and the issue of merit creeps up so much, and it's so connected ideologically with race and gender and all the nationality and all the other problems of kind of discrimination and prejudice that eschewing yourself from that and just kind of saying, okay, that I'm not going to worry about that. Maybe that is an issue, maybe it's not, but I'm not going to worry about this merit issue. What I'm going to worry about is looking at how we can lift up the most marginalized groups and see what kind of effect that has on the world around us. And from what I can tell, in my little life, it's had profound effects.
Did you say your little life? Don't say that. You are doing
we're here for a very short time.
No, but you are doing such important work. I mean, you are magnifying your influence on a daily basis. I mean, you're doing things that reverberate throughout the particular society or the particular business that you touch.
It's easy in my area of work to get really frustrated with the progress of things because it seems like every time you make a couple of steps forward, you're making a step back. Yeah. I try to remind my students and some of my colleagues who I mentor that 250 million years ago, there were dinosaurs. A couple hundred years ago, we got human rights. So we've come a long way. Even though things are slow, and that's a privileged thing to say that, we just need to be patient. But at the same time, we have come a long way. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to the generations who came before, who have championed the rights of all marginalized groups. And but the fight goes on, and I don't think we'll ever finish this fight.
No, I don't think we will. Especially when Norway is one thing, but when I look back home to the United States, it seems like American pride is misplaced. It seems like American pride has become something different. Like we were talking about that harshness, that thing where you evaluate whether or not a person deserves something that should be a basic human right, such as a living wage. It seems like American pride it's been redefined. We're proud of too many people anyway are proud of being that tough guy that calls out the person who's demanding a minimum wage. Why do you deserve that? And it's the kind of work that you're doing that will bring more awareness to things that should be quite basic. Things like universal design, things like equality. It should be a given that everyone has focus on that.
Yeah.
So
human dignity is another part of that equation that I think we've really lost sight of.
Haven't we?
We talk a lot about equality, which is great. I think we need to continue that conversation around equality because, again, it evolves. But we've lost sight of this basic issue of human dignity, which is also our fundamental right. And that means, so to me, it just kind of means being nice.
I say that all the time. It's not very complex. This whole thing, you'll hear a lot of people on the right talk about how political correctness is such a bad thing. why can't we just get rid of the word political correctness? And can't we just say that being an asshole is a bad thing? Can't we just say that being kind is a good thing?
Being respectful.
Respectful.
Yeah.
It's really basic. It's not that hard.
This is my response to people who bring this conversation up, is that I was taught as a child to be respectful of other people, especially people who have a different experience than me, and to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I have no idea how they've come up and what they've experienced in their life. How am I ever have a reference point for someone who's, come up in a completely different environment than I? So I'm not going to put my expectations on them. Like, that seems so bizarre to me fundamentally. Yeah. It's like looking at a raccoon and being like, "Oh yeah, I got you all figured out." You don't. It's a raccoon. It's a different analogy here, but like the point is that we can't imagine what it is like to live in another person's shoes.
Yeah. Well, compassion needs to be brought to the forefront. Compassion is being pushed aside, needs to come back to the forefront. Just think for a second, how does that person feel? Yeah. What has that person experienced? What can I do to maybe smooth the path forward for that person? Because it doesn't really take a lot to do just that. Yeah. It really doesn't.
I talk a lot about surrounding yourself with diversity. And I think this is been a critical aspect of my growth, has been being deliberate about working with people who have different perspectives than I have.
Yes.
In my industry, academia, computer science, I could work with white dudes all day long. That would not be hard. And we would all talk about the things that we love talking about, and everybody would be like, "Oh yeah, of course it's that way. That's the only thing we ever know." Yeah. It is a challenge to bring people with different perspectives into, your working teams or your life. But that challenge comes with such personal and professional growth that you could not imagine. I'm not here where I am today because I've only worked with people like me. I'm here today because when that person that had a completely different background than I had challenged me on something, I was like, "Oh my God, we need to work together because I need to understand why I'm wrong."
Exactly. And that's why diversity is important. Diversity brings about personal growth. And who doesn't want to grow? Who doesn't want to grow? So
yeah, I wish that were a more commonly held value. Who doesn't want to grow? I wish more people wanted to grow.
John Allen for Statsminister.
Yes, please. I'll vote you in, my friend. I'll vote you in.
So let me ask you this. What is a typical work day for you? How much time do you put towards your work, and what do you do in your free time?
Because
you seem pretty relaxed. You don't seem like a stressed out type of guy.
No, I'm super chill.
Yeah, you are.
No, I only say that because the people who are really close to me would laugh hysterically if they heard me say I'm super chill.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm all right. So here's my daily schedule. I'm an early riser, so I'm usually up sometimes as early as 4, but I usually get up around 4:30 to 5:30. Yeah. I also go to bed super early, so I'm not necessarily shorting myself on sleep.
What's early for you?
9:30.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm getting a full night's sleep. It wasn't always like this. This is, I've had sleep problems since I was 18.
Okay.
But usually 4:30, I'm up. I get ready. First thing I do, make myself a cup of coffee, meditate. So I have a nice little espresso maker that takes 20 minutes to make espresso. So while it's cooking my espresso, I sit down and I meditate. Before I turn my phone on, before I look at my messages or anything like that, I'm tech free for the first 20 minutes of my day.
Beautiful.
Next thing I do, I have my coffee. I check my two messages. I check. One is my partner, see how she's doing, see what how she finished up the night. And one is a really good friend of mine, and I just check and see how she's doing.
Yeah.
Next thing I do, I sit on my couch. I play Switch until 6:30. 6:30, my Google Home tells me, "Anthony, time to get to work." And I go, I put on my headset. I find a good podcast that can teach me something because I'm still in like information absorption mode.
Sure.
And
never ends. It never ends.
No, it never ends. Learning is lifelong learning. Go for a walk around down the river here, the Akerselva River. So if you're ever out at 6:30 a.m., you'll find me walking down between Grünerløkka and Greenland down that river, and head back to the house 7 o'clock. Finish getting ready. I'm sitting down at my computer usually 7:30.
Okay.
Starting then, I'll do creative work till about 10. So this is, work on my podcast, work on my website, content creation generally, maybe work on some business development stuff, but really trying to get creativity in at the earliest part of the day. Yeah. Writing. I love writing early. It's my golden hour. I usually grab a bite to eat around 10, and I'll take a leisurely breakfast. So I'll eat for take an hour, maybe even an hour and a half if I have the time.
At home or out?
No, I eat at home, Corona and everything like that. Yeah, but if I go out, it's usually just have a cup of coffee and sit in the cafe for a few minutes.
You know what I miss, just to shoot in here? I miss Oslo coffee shops.
Yeah.
I miss taking, I live in Drammen, and every once in a while it works out that my wife and we can jump on the train, come into Oslo by 7:38 in the morning, and just kind of watch the city wake up and sit and look out a window through a cafe and have a coffee. Beautiful. Gosh, I miss that.
And Oslo is a surprisingly good coffee destination too.
It is.
Travel a lot.
Gosh, absolutely.
I'm hard pressed to get a decent cup of coffee outside of Oslo.
Oslo is the place to go if and I wasn't a coffee drinker before I met my wife. She got me hooked on cappuccino.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And now it's been a while, not just because of COVID, but just because, life. But before we had our kids, when we had a lot more free time, we would do that. Take the train, and actually we would drive because it was a lot easier with parking back then in Oslo. Drive into Oslo, park the car, and just walk around. And here's a new one. And we'd go in, and good Lord, the caffeine rush we would get because we would just a whole day of just going into coffee shops and drinking coffee. But it's just so relaxing. Anyway, I just had to say that. I'm sorry. Continue. What's your day like?
So I'll have my breakfast / lunch around 10. I'm back kind of in the office around 11, and I usually like to do 11 to 3 or 11 to 4. I like to do a lot of more critical thinking work. So that's the time that I schedule for the real more intensive tasks or meetings that I have to do to keep progress moving forward.
But up until this point of your day, you've pretty much been alone.
Yeah, exactly.
More of an introspective time from the time you wake up until roughly this time around 11 or so. Yeah,
roughly around 12:30. That's when I start doing the more hands-on kind of work. Then around 3:30 or 4, that's when I schedule some of the meetings that are more informative, more kind of just there to kind of check in, more administrative, more routine.
Yeah.
So 4:30 till, let's say, I put a cap, usually 7 o'clock is the latest I'll run a meeting. After that, I'll grab a quick bite for dinner. And then just lay on the couch and play video games until 9 o'clock. It sounds a little pathetic, but I love it.
You know what? I like that because a lot of people in a complex job situation that you're in, they won't set aside that time. I can see it in your very presence. It's in your face. It's in your eyes that you are quite relaxed.
Thank you.
And yet a lot of people that do your kind of work are not relaxed. They're stressed and they work constantly.
I've approached this. I mean, the stress level in my job is definitely present.
Sure. You literally have lives in your hand.
Yeah. I have the coping strategies that I've adopted has been a couple of different approaches. One, I can use 5 minutes really, really effectively. Sure. So if I have 5 minutes between a meeting, I will literally lay down on my couch and just close my eyes and lay there for 5 minutes. And that is so restorative.
That is so recharging. Oh my gosh. Yes, it's very effective.
And one of the things I recently started doing, whenever I feel that tension, that stress of my mind's going crazy, my body's starting to tense up really bad, I'll sit down, and it sounds so stupid, I'll do 10 push-ups.
You know what? It does not sound stupid. It doesn't sound stupid. I can relate to that. I'm a power lifter. I was on the U.S. national team.
Nice.
Yeah, and I have some Norwegian records. I set the Norwegian raw squat record in 2019. I was 50 when I did that.
Damn.
But after that, actually during that entire process, I've had several operations. Most recently on my shoulder was in May of 2019. I set the record in February 2019. My seventh or eighth shoulder operation was in May of 2019. Wow. And then now in March of this year, I had a neck operation. So you can say from the spring of 2019 until now, my opportunity to train has been drastically reduced. I'm in horrible shape. I can't exercise the way I want to. And I feel it, not just physically, but also mentally. The stress, because it was a coping mechanism to be able to exercise. You really do unwind. You really do treat yourself, if you will, mentally, emotionally, and physically, of course, when you train. So doing those push-ups to push it, to push,
to do it. But
doing
it resets everything.
Absolutely, it does. It's quite effective. And I wanted to touch on that because for anybody that's listening, that is so important to take care of your stress levels. Stress can be good. Stress can be a motivator. It can put you into action. But if you let it just snowball, and it will spiral out of control. But something as simple as doing, 10, 15, 20 push-ups, or running in place. I know people who will run in place for 2 minutes. And,
jump rope.
Yeah. And it really will cure that moment of stress, that moment of panic. People use that to control panic. People who suffer from chronic panic disease.
It just gets you out of your head.
Yes.
Or at least for me, it gets me out of my head. It gets me into my physical body, gets the good chemicals kind of flowing through my body. So then I'm like, oh yeah, it's not the end of the world because somebody sent me a 3-sentence email that I imagined was coming across as like a personal attack or some nonsense, and it was actually just them asking me, hey, can we meet next week? And you read way too much into it.
It's really good to do that. It will distract you from a moment and just remove you for a moment from that thing that sets you into that stress condition. It's important.
And for me, I mean, a lot of these issues have been chronic. I mean, 20 years now, I've been working at the pace that I'm working. I'm not a middle of the road kind of person. I either do it all the way at like 11, or I just completely ignore it and pretend like it's not an issue. One of the things I'd been pretending like wasn't an issue, at least for probably 17 years, was my mental health.
Okay.
And the impact that the stress was having on my mental health.
Yeah.
And it's not for red flags or warning signs. I had so many people on my way up in my career saying, Anthony, you need to work less. You need to be less stressed because this is going to have an impact on you. And I said, nah, I'll figure it out when I'm older, or, what's the big deal? I'll be, okay, so I die when I'm, 72 instead of 73.
Well, everybody should desire longevity in whatever they're doing. And if you desire to be in the game over a long period of time, you've got to take control of that from the very get-go. This whole thing with stress, with working too long, and I look at that from an athletic perspective. It's real easy to put this from an athletic perspective and into life, into business, into work. This whole thing about longevity, you have to pace yourself. I can go in and I can lift. I can have a workout for powerlifting that. There's thousands of kilos that will be lifted during that training regimen, but I also have to plug in my rest and recuperation period. Yes. So as it is for athletics, so is it for life and business and work. Yeah.
And that cycle can happen really, really quickly, or it can happen much more slowly.
Yes.
I had a voice teacher who taught me a really valuable lesson earlier in my career, who said, the reason why he was very... he would teach voice lessons to like Metropolitan Opera stars, Like he was working at the top of his game. So the fact that I got to take lessons with him was a huge
so you're a singer, you're a vocalist?
I was in a galaxy far, far away. But he would tell me that, because I would ask him, what is your secret? How can you manage? Because he was on flights to Paris and London and New York every other week. And I said, how do you manage this kind of lifestyle? And he said, you have to let it flow through you. And I think this is why I do the push-ups, because the push-ups let me process the stress.
Yeah.
And if you bottle it up, then you will burn out. You will take that to your grave.
It's just a matter of time. Yeah, it's just a matter of time. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
What kind of singing did you do?
I studied music at a university outside, a liberal arts college outside of DC for about 4 years.
Okay.
I started there studying just vocal performance. Yeah. Within the first year, I started studying different kinds of music studies. So I studied archaeomusicology, which is like
archaeomusicology.
Yes, it's like archaeology and like music history put together. So I did a study of this artifact from the Middle East that was housed at the University of Pennsylvania. So I did the first study on that. It was just a little bone flute made out of a goat leg. Wow. And so I wrote a whole paper on it. They have it at the museum now.
How do you write a whole paper on a bone from a goat that's turned into a flute?
Lots of interlibrary loans of books like this big, of archaeology manuals, that thick. It was a very interesting. It was one of the teachers that I respected the most, because she taught like a 2-class series in music history. And so I got the idea for doing the study at the first semester. And I told her, I want to study this through the full year because I need that time to like actually dedicate it. And she said, well, fine. I have to give you a grade at the end of the semester. So I'm going to give you an incomplete in this class. And then when you submit this paper next year, I'll give you the final grade.
Okay. Yeah.
And realizing that was an option and that teachers could support their students in the way was so
that's
empowering
very supportive.
For me.
Yeah.
Yes. So I kind of that was a really important part of my life. Anyways, you asked about the performance. So I studied musical theater for a while. I ended up studying opera performance as that's where I exited that career.
Amazing.
I did a few performances on the university level. I sang with the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra for about a year. While I was in grad school and then working full time at a university, and I didn't have the right tools to cope with working 9 to 5 in a tech job at a university, studying the epidemiology of HIV/AIDS in the evenings, and then going to rehearsal at like 8 or 9 o'clock at night until 10 or 11, and then coming back home and doing it all over again for a performance. I did it for about a year, but it was just so much cognitive leaping that I couldn't kind of do well in all of those respects. So I dialed back, and of course, arts are always the first thing you stop doing. And so I focused in on the research and the public health stuff. So.
I always have so much respect for people who study music. I hesitate to call myself a musician because I have no education in it. I'm self-taught.
Yeah, but that's not what defines a musician.
No, you're right. Although there are some people who will look down their nose at those who don't understand music theory. I practice music theory as a musician, but I don't understand music theory, and that's where the conflict can come in with those who are educated in music. But cool, musician.
Yeah, it was a wonderful part, and that taught me a lot too. Because I mean, one of the things you learn studying music is the work ethic that comes with routine practice.
Oh yeah,
and you'll find no one with a more ethical, more work ethic. Yeah, I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but with a more of a dedication to their craft than pianists. The pianists at my school would practice for 10 hours a day, and mind-blowing amount of effort put into their art and their craft. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, I don't put in 10 hours a day now, and I love my job with a passion. And so I'm just thinking here, like, these young people who are really dedicating themselves, they learn a level of work ethic that most of us never get in university.
Yeah, and you mentioned that arts is the first to go if someone is pursuing multiple degrees, and that's true. Arts usually are the first thing to go. I wish that was not the case, because
I agree.
Those who practice the arts are some of the most interesting people. Those are some of the people that have the most to contribute to society, not just because they can play the piano or because they can paint, but this thing up here, the knowledge that they can share, the views that they can share with the world.
There is no innovation without art.
Exactly.
It's so undervalued. And I have these arguments with people a lot of times, because I'll get approached by especially academics saying, oh, well, you can't, be a master of multiple fields. Okay, fine. I'll accept that. I'll accept the premise maybe that if you focus on multiple fields, then you may not be able to drill down to the level that if you just focused on one. Oh. Said, however, the value that comes out of knowing multiple fields is much, much, much greater, much more beneficial than just knowing one field so thoroughly.
Absolutely.
And we have these role models are out there. Darwin he worked across multiple different disciplines, from anthropology on through to evolution, science, biology, and everything else. We have Pythagoras, musician, musical theorist, and mathematician.
That's true.
We have Da Vinci, artist as well as engineer and innovator. Like, we have so many role models. Steve Jobs. I mean, we have so many role models out there. And I hate that I just cited all men. But you get my point. Like, the ability to think across multiple fields is so valuable. Absolutely critical. It is.
I'm a believer in gathering as much knowledge as possible. I salute the Jack or Jane of all trades. Gather as much knowledge as possible, because more knowledge just puts that individual in a stronger position to not only help themselves and their family, but to be in that strength, have that strength in their home base, to then be able to reach out to help others. And you only get that way if you have a multitude of sources for knowledge. The Jack or Jane of all trades, those are the ones that are going to make the most change in the world, I believe.
We have to not only revere people who have that kind of ability to think laterally is what they're doing, think across multiple fields. We have to stop shaming young people if they're not working in the field that they got their degree, or if they've tried multiple degrees.
Yes.
I have so many students who come to me and they bear this weight of shame that comes with, oh, I did this degree in this field, but now I'm working in this other field. I wish that I could have found a job in my field. No. Don't frame it that way at all.
No, a lot of people would look at that as a sign of indecisiveness, but I look at that as a sign of that's a person that's on a quest for knowledge.
Yes,
that's a person who sought knowledge in engineering. They got their degree and they find out they're not satisfied with just that knowledge. So now they're branching off into whatever. And I see
pastry
nothing.
chef.
I see nothing negative in that at all.
And the negative, the bad part of it is the people who are like single-mindedly pursuing one career field and hate it. We have enough doctors, lawyers, engineers who hate their jobs. Yes. We don't need any more people who hate their jobs. We need people who love their jobs. And that means we need people to be able to have the freedom to experiment, to study different fields. And that means we need radical reform to our education systems, because our education systems are so garbage at giving people that opportunity to transition to different ways of thinking in different fields.
Yes. I love these kind of discussions. Here we are, you were brought on to speak about your work, and we're branching off into, but then that kind of says something about you and about your work. You have to have a broad vision. You have to dip your toe in several pools and test them out in order for you to do your work most effectively. Am I right?
I didn't know that coming up. I mean, I started my academic career studying business, right? Yeah. And I always studied business because my mom was like, well, if you study business, you can do a lot of different things. So I was like, okay, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Yeah. Let's just study business and see how it goes.
So what have you studied? What degrees do you have?
So I got a business degree. I got a liberal arts degree. I have a music minor is what I ended up graduating with, all because I didn't do my final, my senior performance. Yeah. I actually turned down a theater scholarship to move to Philadelphia and start my graduate studies. I got a master's in public health and then a PhD, or not a PhD, a doctoral degree in social and political science. So I run across a number of fields here, but I didn't know any of this coming up. So when I finished my business degree and then I went in to start studying music, that was a left turn for me. I had no intention of using my business degree. When I finished my music degree and I went on to study public health, I had no intention of using my music degree.
No.
It was only later in my life, towards my mid and end of my 30s, that I was able to start weaving some of these threads together.
I see, yeah.
Start understanding, okay, now that I have this social and political science angle on things, here's how that might relate to the health angle on things.
Exactly.
And then bringing in that music ethic of practice.
Exactly.
And bringing that into my...
And there is the benefit of cultivating your interests in several fields. If you're not, I don't know, if you're not satisfied or if you just feel like there's more to learn, do it. There's no downside to that. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Yeah, you might have your parents scratching their heads and wondering if a scholarship has been wasted or whatever. But in the end, it's just the gathering and cultivating of new knowledge. That's all it is.
Yeah. I mean, I had friends and family member asking me up until very recently, when are you going to finish school? And so, probably never. I mean, I still think about what would I study if I started a bachelor's degree tomorrow, right? And like, what would I study if I wanted to get another master's degree or just start a whole new career? What would I do? Yeah. And I think that we should always do that. That's self-reflection. That's challenging yourself.
So if I were to, first, let me make sure that I pronounce your last name right. Giannoumis? Sure.
Yes.
Okay. So if I were to ask you, Dr. Anthony Giannoumis is, what would you say?
Dr. Anthony, so the way I usually pitch it is action researcher, social entrepreneur, and equality advocate. I'm still pretty comfortable with that.
That's a good pitch.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's going to have to do for now. I don't know what my third act is going to look like. So I just started my second act of my life, right? So first act was just trying a whole bunch of stuff, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, seeing what I love, seeing what I don't. Second act started really recently, a couple of years back, when I made the decision to basically get back into the grassroots of things and restart my career as an entrepreneur, really focus in on impact. And that's still taking shape. I don't even know what that's going to look like in the next 10 or 15 years. But it's something I want to dedicate myself for. I'm committed to making a 10-year, growth in this area. After that, it's hard to say. I think the best thing for me to do is to continue to find ways of decentering myself, recentering the work that I'm doing on the people whose lives need it the most and who have the greatest chance of taking it forward. So that's really my goal and mission here, is just to take myself out of the loop, use myself as the beacon to attract as much attention as possible and then refocus.
Well, it's, that's a beautiful description of who you are and what you do. That's a good place to round off this episode.
Works for me. I
tell you, but I hope you'll come back though.
But you say time and date, I'm there for you. Even if it's tomorrow, I would be happy to do this again, John. I've really enjoyed this.
Like I said, your work attracted me right away. I think it was the same day I saw your first videos when I approached you about coming on.
Really? Oh, wow.
It's and that day I sat and I watched tons of your videos. I'm like, this is a guy I have to speak with. This is a guy who I can learn something from. This is a guy who is doing good work. And
thank you.
You've proven my first inclination to be quite correct.
It's so meaningful for me to hear that, because that kind of validation really helps you through the times that it can be more challenging. So thank you for that.
Well, the validation is in the results of the work that you do. I'm just a guy who stumbled upon you. But thank you so much for coming on my podcast. Dr. Anthony Giannoumis, everybody, a work in progress. And for those of you who are listening or watching, please subscribe. That's how this thing grows. That's how I continue to do what I do. If you'd like to donate, you will find links to different platforms where you can donate and support me in the description of this episode. Okay? Thanks for being here. Remember to love, be loved, and enjoy the process. Bye, everybody. Okay, man. Well, there we go.